Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Victor Pugh adjusted his black tactical vest one last time before stepping out of the armored vehicle. The Syrian desert stretched endlessly before him, but his mind was already back home in Virginia, thinking about his wife Lydia and their 10-year-old son, Richard. After 15 years of classified operations that officially didn't exist, Victor had finally decided to retire from the shadow world of Black Ops. At 42, Victor was a man forged by violence and tempered by discipline. His muscular frame bore the scars of countless missions, a knife wound along his ribs from Chechnya, bullet graze on his shoulder from Somalia, and burn marks from an IED in Afghanistan. But it was his cold, calculating gray eyes that truly marked him as dangerous. Men who had served under him knew that Victor Pugh never forgot a slight and never forgave betrayal. "This is it, boss," said his second-in-command, Emmanuel Kane, as they approached the compound. "After this extraction, you're officially a civilian." Victor nodded, checking his modified M4 carbine. The mission was simple: extract a captured CIA operative from a terrorist cell. What should have been a routine operation, however, was about to become Victor's last dance with death before returning to what he believed was his perfect family life. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in their suburban Virginia home, Lydia Pugh was living a very different reality. At 38, she still maintained the beauty that had first caught Victor's attention 12 years ago: flowing auburn hair, emerald eyes, and a smile that could disarm anyone. But beneath that perfect exterior, resentment had been festering for years. Lydia stood in her marble-floored kitchen, staring at her reflection in the window. The house was immaculate, a testament to Victor's success and her own obsessive need for control. But perfection, she had learned, was a prison when you craved excitement. "Mom, when's Dad coming home?" asked Richard, looking up from his homework at the kitchen island. The boy had inherited his father's sharp features, but his mother's eyes that had seen too much happiness drain away over the years. "Soon, sweetheart," Lydia replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Very soon." What Richard didn't know was that his mother had been planning for his father's return in ways that would shatter their family forever. The affair with Jay Massey had started innocently enough. He was their contractor, renovating the basement into Victor's planned home office. But Jay had awakened something in Lydia that had been dormant for years: the thrill of rebellion. Jay Massey was everything Victor wasn't: spontaneous, unpredictable, and dangerous in a way that excited rather than comforted. At 35, he had the rugged appearance of a man who lived on the edge, with dark hair, stubble that never quite became a beard, and hands that knew how to build things as well as tear them down. He had a criminal past that Lydia found intoxicating. Nothing serious enough to land him in prison, but enough to make him the kind of man her soldier husband would never approve of. "You sure he's not coming back early?" Jay asked, emerging from the basement where he'd been installing soundproofing panels. The irony of that particular renovation would soon become clear. "His mission isn't supposed to end for another week," Lydia assured him, moving closer until she could smell his cologne mixed with sawdust and sweat. "We have time." But time, as they would soon discover, was the one thing they didn't have. Back in Syria, Victor's mission had taken an unexpected turn. Intelligence indicated that the terrorist cell was planning to move their prisoner within hours, forcing Victor's team to accelerate their timeline. What was supposed to be a week-long surveillance operation had compressed into a single night of action. "Extract in 12 hours, Victor told his team over the comm. "We go tonight, or we lose him forever." As the sun set over the desert, Victor prepared for what he believed would be his final mission. He had no idea that the real battle was waiting for him at home, where the two people he trusted most were planning something that would test every skill he'd learned in 15 years of warfare. The extraction went flawlessly. By dawn, Victor and his team were wheels up, heading back to the States with their rescued operative. Victor spent the flight staring out the window, mentally preparing for civilian life. He had plans: teaching Richard to hunt, taking Lydia on the European vacation she'd always wanted, maybe even starting his own security consulting firm. As the plane crossed into American airspace, Victor smiled for the first time in months. He was going home early, and he planned to surprise his family. It would be, he thought, the perfect homecoming. He had no idea that he was flying directly into a betrayal that would unleash the most dangerous enemy he'd ever faced. himself. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Victor's homecoming was scheduled for the following Tuesday, but as his military transport touched down at Andrews Air Force Base on Thursday evening, he felt an unexpected lightness in his chest. The mission had concluded 3 days ahead of schedule, giving him the perfect opportunity to surprise Lydia and Richard. During the debriefing, Colonel Stevens had offered Victor a promotion and another tour, but Victor had declined without hesitation. "I've got a family waiting for me," he'd said, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. The drive from the base to his suburban Virginia home took 40 minutes through familiar streets that seemed almost surreal after the harsh landscapes he'd grown accustomed to. Everything looked exactly as he'd left it. The manicured lawns, the white picket fences, the American flags hanging from front porches. It was the kind of normalcy he'd been fighting to protect, and now he was finally coming home to claim it for himself. Victor had deliberately left his phone off during the flight, wanting to maintain the element of surprise. As he pulled into his driveway at 9:30 p.m., he noticed Jay Massey's contractor van parked across the street. Odd timing for renovation work, but not entirely unusual. Jay had been working on the basement office project for the past month, and Victor had been impressed with his attention to detail and professionalism during their brief interactions before deployment. The house was lit from within, warm and inviting. Victor could see shadows moving behind the curtains in the living room, and he smiled, imagining Lydia and Richard watching television together, unaware that their evening was about to become infinitely better. But as Victor approached the front door, his trained ear caught something that made him pause. Voices, not the casual conversation of a mother and son watching TV, but intense, urgent whispers coming from the direction of the basement. His 15 years of Black Ops experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming danger. Moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in hostile territories, Victor made his way around the house to the basement window. What he saw through the gap in the newly installed soundproofing made his blood freeze. Richard was tied to a chair in the center of the basement, tears streaming down his face. Lydia stood nearby, and Victor could see a gasoline can in her hands. Jay Massey was holding what appeared to be a lighter, and both adults were laughing, actually laughing, at his son's terror. For a moment, Victor's mind refused to process what he was seeing. This wasn't possible. This wasn't his wife, his family, his life. But the training kicked in, overriding shock with tactical assessment. His son was in immediate danger. Everything else was secondary. Victor moved to his vehicle and retrieved his service weapon, a .45 caliber pistol that had never failed him. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, but inside, something fundamental was breaking apart. The Victor Pugh who had trusted in family, in love, in the basic goodness of the people closest to him, was dying. What was being born in his place was something far more dangerous. He returned to the basement window, watching, listening, gathering intelligence. Lydia was speaking now, her voice carrying clearly through the window. "You see, sweetheart," she was saying to Richard, her tone mockingly maternal. "Daddy's never coming back. He's going to die in one of his stupid wars, and then Mommy and Jay can finally be together. But we can't have any loose ends, can we?" "Please, Mom," Richard sobbed. "I won't tell anyone. I promise I won't tell." Jay laughed, a sound that Victor memorized for future reference. "Kid's got spirit. Shame he takes after his old man." "The timing has to be perfect," Lydia continued, setting down the gasoline can. "The house fire needs to look accidental. Gas leak, maybe. Poor little Richard, home alone when tragedy struck." Victor had heard enough. He moved to the basement entrance, his weapon drawn, his mind already calculating angles, exit strategies, and the most efficient way to neutralize threats to his son. But as he reached for the door handle, he stopped. In that moment of pause, Victor Pugh the protective father warred with Victor Pugh the tactical operator. The father wanted to burst in, guns blazing, and save his son immediately. But the operator recognized an opportunity for something far more valuable than rescue: intelligence. His wife and her lover had just revealed themselves to be capable of murdering a child. His child. That wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. That was calculated evil. And if Victor had learned anything in 15 years of dealing with evil people, it was that they never limited themselves to just one atrocity. How long had this been planned? What else had they done? Were there other victims, other crimes? And most importantly, who else was involved? Victor made a decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of the immediate rescue that every fatherly instinct demanded, he would wait. He would watch. He would learn everything there was to know about the people who had infiltrated his life and threatened his son. But first, he needed an insurance policy. Moving silently to his vehicle, Victor retrieved a small device from his gear bag, a high-definition recording device that could capture both audio and video in low-light conditions. He positioned it carefully at the basement window, ensuring it would document everything that happened next. Then, and only then, did Victor Pugh prepare to make his entrance. But this wouldn't be the joyful homecoming he'd imagined. This would be the beginning of a war that would test everything he'd learned about strategy, patience, and the art of making enemies pay for their mistakes. As he approached the basement door for the second time, Victor allowed himself one last moment as the man he used to be, a husband and father who believed in love and trust and the fundamental goodness of family. That man died as Victor's hand closed around the door handle. What entered that basement was something else entirely. Chapter 3, The Homecoming. Victor stood outside the basement door for exactly 30 seconds, using the time to center himself and plan his approach. In hostile territory, the difference between life and death often came down to the first 5 seconds of contact. This situation required something more subtle than his usual direct action approach. His son was still in immediate danger, but Lydia and Jay seemed to be savoring the moment, drawing out Richard's terror rather than acting immediately. That psychological cruelty gave Victor the window he needed to orchestrate something more devastating than a simple rescue. With his recording device capturing everything and his weapon ready, Victor opened the basement door and descended the stairs with deliberate, measured steps. His boots made just enough noise to announce his presence without appearing to sneak. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, the scene before him crystallized into perfect, horrible clarity. Richard's eyes found his father first, hope and terror warring in his young face. The boy's mouth was duct-taped, but his eyes screamed for help. Lydia had her back to the stairs, still holding the gasoline can, while Jay stood facing Richard with the lighter in his hand. "Drop it," Victor said, his voice carrying the cold authority of a man who had given final warnings to terrorists and war criminals. Jay spun around, his face shifting from surprised confusion to cocky defiance as he processed what he was seeing. Well, look who's home early from playing soldier." Lydia turned more slowly, and when her eyes met Victor's, he saw something that completed his transformation from husband to enemy. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't afraid. She was annoyed at being interrupted. "Victor," she said, her voice steady. "You're supposed to be overseas for another week." "Plans changed," Victor replied, keeping his weapon trained on Jay while his peripheral vision tracked Lydia's movements. "Step away from my son. Both of you." Jay smirked, the expression Victor would remember later as the moment he decided that killing the man quickly would be too merciful. "Or what? You'll shoot us in front of your precious boy? That'll really mess with his head. You'd be surprised what children can recover from," Victor said conversationally. "What they can't recover from is being murdered by their mother and her boyfriend." "Oh, Victor," Lydia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. We've been planning this for months. The basement renovations, the soundproofing, even the timing of your deployment, all of it carefully orchestrated." Victor's finger tightened on the trigger, but his voice remained steady. "Keep talking. Your precious security clearance gave us access to your deployment schedules," Jay said, clearly enjoying himself. "Lydia's been very helpful in making sure we knew exactly when you'd be out of the country. The life insurance policy you updated before deployment," Lydia added. "Thanks me for being such a devoted wife. $2 million, Victor. More than enough for Jay and me to start fresh somewhere tropical." Victor processed this information with the detached efficiency of a professional. His wife had been feeding information about his military operations to a civilian. That was treason, and in Victor's world, treason had only one punishment. "There's just one problem with your plan," Victor said, taking a step closer. "What's that?" Jay asked, his confidence wavering slightly as he finally seemed to recognize something dangerous in Victor's demeanor. "You assumed I was alone." The basement lights suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. In the confusion that followed, Victor moved with the fluid precision of a man who had learned to kill in complete darkness. Jay's scream was cut short by the sound of a suppressed gunshot, followed by the thud of his body hitting the concrete floor. When the lights came back on 10 seconds later, Jay Massey lay crumpled against the far wall, a neat bullet wound in his shoulder. Painful and incapacitating, but not fatal. Victor had deliberately avoided vital organs. Death would come later, when Victor was ready to grant it. Lydia stood frozen, the gasoline can fallen from her nerveless fingers. Behind her, Emmanuel Kane emerged from the shadows where he'd been waiting with night vision equipment and tactical gear. "Sorry I'm late, boss," Emmanuel said, checking Jay's pulse. "Had to make sure the perimeter was secure." Victor moved to Richard, cutting his bonds and removing the tape from his mouth with gentle efficiency. "Are you hurt?" he asked his son. "Dad," Richard sobbed, throwing his arms around Victor's neck. "I thought they were going to kill me. Mom said you were never coming home." "I'm here now," Victor said, his voice soft as he held his son. But over Richard's shoulder, his eyes locked onto Lydia's with the promise of terrible retribution. "Daddy's home, and everything's going to be all right." But even as he comforted his son, Victor's mind was already working through the implications. Lydia's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was operational. She had accessed classified information and potentially compromised national security. Jay wasn't just an adulterer. He was a conspirator in treason and attempted murder. "Emmanuel," Victor said quietly, "how much did you hear?" "Enough," his former second-in-command replied. "Want me to call this into the colonel?" "Not yet." Victor helped Richard to his feet, noting with professional satisfaction that the boy seemed physically unharmed. "First, we're going to have a conversation with my wife and her friend." A long conversation. Lydia finally found her voice. "Victor, you don't understand. I can explain." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Victor cut her off. "You've been planning to murder our son and frame it as an accident so you could collect insurance money and run away with your boyfriend. You've been feeding him classified information about my deployments. And you've been using our home as a base of operations for conspiracy and treason." "It's not treason. Sharing deployment schedules with unauthorized civilians? That's textbook treason, Lydia. The penalty for which, in wartime, is death." The basement fell silent except for Jay's labored breathing and Richard's quiet sniffles. Victor looked around the room, at the soundproofing that was supposed to muffle his son's screams, at the gasoline that was meant to erase evidence, at the wife who had betrayed everything he thought he knew about love and family. "Here's what's going to happen," Victor said, his voice carrying the same authority he'd used to command special operations teams in the world's most dangerous places. "Richard is going upstairs to pack a bag. Emmanuel is going to take him somewhere safe. And then Lydia and Jay and I are going to have a very detailed discussion about justice." "Victor," Lydia tried again. "I'm still your wife. I'm still Richard's mother." Victor looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was completely devoid of emotion. "No, you're not. The woman I married died tonight in this basement. The mother Richard knew ceased to exist the moment you tied him to that chair. What's standing in front of me now is just an enemy who happens to know where I sleep." And in that moment, as the lights of his former life finally went out for good, Victor Pugh stopped being a husband and father and became something else entirely, an instrument of perfectly calculated vengeance. The war had begun. Chapter 4, The Interrogation. Emmanuel escorted Richard upstairs while Victor maintained watch over his prisoners. Jay remained conscious but incapacitated, his shoulder wound bleeding steadily enough to keep him focused, but not enough to kill him. Yet, Lydia sat on the basement floor, her back against the wall, finally beginning to understand that her carefully laid plans had not just failed, but had awakened something in her husband that she'd never seen before. "Richard's secure," Emmanuel reported when he returned 20 minutes later. "Took him to the safe house. Kid's tough. Asked me to tell you he loves you, and that he's proud you came home." Victor nodded, his expression unchanging. In his world, family was sacred, and those who threatened family faced consequences that extended far beyond simple death. What Lydia and Jay had attempted wasn't just attempted murder. It was the violation of the most fundamental trust that existed between people. "Before we begin," Victor said, positioning a chair in front of his prisoners, "I want you both to understand something. I've spent 15 years questioning enemies of the United States. I know how to extract information, and I know how to make the process educational. He pulled out his phone and played back the recording from the basement window. Lydia's voice filled the room. The timing has to be perfect. The house fire needs to look accidental. Gas leak, maybe. Poor little Richard, home alone when tragedy struck. That's conspiracy to commit murder, Victor continued clinically. But since the intended victim was a minor and the method involved burning him alive, it qualifies as first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. In Virginia, that's a capital offense. Jay tried to speak, but Victor held up a hand. You'll have your turn. Right now, I'm interested in understanding the scope of this operation. Victor's interrogation techniques had been refined in some of the world's most dangerous places, but he'd never applied them to someone he'd once loved. The psychological component was new, but the methodology remained the same. Establish dominance, exploit weaknesses, and systematically break down resistance until the subject begged to cooperate. Lydia, he said, his voice almost gentle. How long have you been planning to kill our son? Victor, please. Wrong answer. Victor turned to Jay and pressed his thumb into the man's shoulder wound. Jay's scream echoed off the soundproofed walls. The beauty of this renovation is that no one can hear us. You chose this location for your crime, which means it's perfect for mine. 3 months, Lydia blurted out. We started planning 3 months ago. Why? Lydia's composure was cracking under the steady pressure of Victor's interrogation. I wanted out. Out of this life. Out of this marriage. Out of being the perfect military wife. But I couldn't just leave. You'd have gotten custody of Richard, and I couldn't let you turn him into another killer like you. Victor absorbed this without visible reaction. So murder was preferable to divorce. It wasn't supposed to be murder, Jay interjected weakly. It was supposed to look like an accident. Clean, quick, no suffering. Victor's laugh was completely devoid of humor. No suffering? You were going to burn a 10-year-old child alive, and you think that's merciful? He would have been unconscious from the smoke before the fire reached him, Lydia said defensively. The casual way she discussed murdering their son confirmed everything Victor needed to know about who these people really were. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a crime of passion. This was calculated evil disguised as domestic planning. Who else knows about this? Victor asked. No one, Lydia said quickly. Victor pressed his thumb into Jay's wound again, producing another scream. Try again. Dale Stout, Jay gasped. My brother Dale helped with the planning. He's the one who suggested the fire. Emmanuel made a note on his tablet. Victor continued his methodical extraction of information, learning about bank accounts set up in false names, travel documents already prepared, and contingency plans that stretched back months. What emerged was a conspiracy that went far beyond simple adultery and murder. The deployment schedules, Victor said after an hour of questioning. How did you access them? Your laptop, Lydia admitted. You never changed your passwords after we got married. I've been copying your files for months. What did you do with that information? Jay has contacts who pay for military intelligence. Nothing too sensitive, just general deployment schedules for special operations units. Victor felt something cold settle in his chest. You've been selling classified information to foreign agents? Not foreign agents, Jay said quickly. Just independent contractors who work overseas security. They need to know when American forces might be operating in their areas. That's espionage, Emmanuel said quietly. That's selling out American soldiers to enemy forces. Victor stood up slowly, his face completely calm. In his 15 years of Black Ops, he'd never encountered betrayal this comprehensive. His wife hadn't just threatened their son, she'd been systematically compromising American military operations for months. How many soldiers have died because of the information you sold? Victor asked. None, Lydia said desperately. It was just deployment schedules. No operational details. Deployment schedules are operational details, Victor replied. Enemy forces use that information to plan ambushes, coordinate attacks, and target American personnel. The full scope of the betrayal was becoming clear. This wasn't just about insurance money or running away together. Lydia and Jay had been running an ongoing espionage operation out of Victor's own home, using his marriage as cover to access and sell classified military information. Dale Stout, Victor said to Emmanuel. Run a background check. I want to know who he is, who he works for, and who he's been talking to. Already on it, Emmanuel replied. his fingers flying over his tablet. Dale Stout, 38, lives in Norfolk. Dishonorable discharge from the Navy in 2018 for trafficking stolen weapons. Currently working as a freelance. This is interesting. He's been flagged by the FBI as a person of interest in several weapons trafficking cases. Victor looked down at his wife, the woman who had shared his bed, borne his child, and held his deepest secrets, and realized that he'd been living with an enemy for years without knowing it. Here's what's going to happen, Victor said finally. You're going to give me the names of everyone you've sold information to. You're going to provide bank account numbers, communication records, and documentation of every transaction. You're going to help me roll up this entire network. And if we don't? Jay asked. Victor's smile was the expression of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. Then I'm going to demonstrate some of the advanced interrogation techniques I learned in places where the Geneva Convention is just a suggestion. The basement fell silent as Lydia and Jay contemplated their situation. They had thought they were dealing with a husband and father. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. A professional killer who had just discovered that his family had been infiltrated by enemies of the state. The interrogation was just beginning. Chapter 5, The Network. Over the next 6 hours, Victor systematically dismantled the espionage network that had been operating out of his own home. What he discovered made him understand that Lydia and Jay's plan to murder Richard was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Using techniques that had broken hardened terrorists, Victor extracted a complete picture of the operation. Dale Stout wasn't just Jay's brother. He was a former Navy weapons specialist who had been recruited by a private military contractor called Meridian Solutions after his dishonorable discharge. Meridian operated in legal gray areas around the world, providing services to corporations and governments that preferred to maintain plausible deniability. They approached Jay about 18 months ago. Lydia confessed as dawn light began filtering through the basement windows. Dale told them about my marriage to a special operations officer. They offered $50,000 for regular intelligence updates. What kind of updates? Victor asked, his voice still carefully controlled despite the rage building inside him. Deployment schedules, unit compositions, operational timelines, Jay replied weakly. He'd lost enough blood to be cooperative, but not enough to lose consciousness. Nothing that would directly target American soldiers. Every piece of intelligence you provided could have been used to kill American personnel, Emmanuel interjected. You may not have pulled triggers, but you loaded the guns. Victor was beginning to understand the full scope of what had been done to him. His marriage hadn't just been betrayed, it had been weaponized. Lydia had been recruited as an asset. Their home had been turned into a safe house for enemy intelligence operations, and his own classified access had been systematically exploited. The insurance money was just a bonus, Lydia continued. Meridian offered us new identities and relocation assistance if we could provide a major intelligence coup. Your personal files, operational records, contact lists, they wanted everything. And Richard's murder was necessary to complete the operation? He would have asked questions, Jay said. Kids notice when their mothers disappear overnight. It was cleaner to stage his death along with yours. Victor felt something fundamental shift inside him. These people hadn't just threatened his family. They had turned his marriage into a weapon against his country. Every night he'd slept next to Lydia. Every time he'd trusted her with operational details. Every moment of intimacy they'd shared had been a victory for enemy intelligence. Show me the communications, Victor ordered. Lydia reluctantly provided passwords for encrypted communication apps on her phone. What Victor found there confirmed his worst fears. Messages with Dale Stout, financial transfers to offshore accounts, and detailed intelligence reports that had been compiled using information from Victor's personal files. But most damning of all was a message thread between Lydia and someone identified only as Meridian 7, final phase approved. Target elimination scheduled for next Tuesday. Extraction team will be standing by. Legacy assets secured. Legacy assets, Victor repeated. What does that mean? Richard, Lydia whispered. They wanted to recruit Richard when he got older. Train him to be an asset like me. The revelation hit Victor like a physical blow. Not only had they planned to murder his son, but they had backup plans to corrupt him if the murder failed. Richard wasn't just a victim to these people. He was a future asset to be cultivated and exploited. Victor's phone buzzed with a message from Emmanuel, who had been working his contacts in military intelligence. Meridian Solutions flagged by NSA as hostile intelligence organization, suspected of working with Chinese MSS and Russian SVR. Your wife's intelligence has been sold to multiple foreign agencies. The full picture was now clear. Lydia hadn't just been cheating on Victor. She'd been recruited by a hostile intelligence organization that had been using her access to him to gather intelligence for America's enemies. The planned murder of Richard was meant to eliminate witnesses and allow for a clean extraction of a valuable asset. How many other military families has Meridian infiltrated? Victor asked. I don't know, Lydia said. Dale never told us about other operations. Victor looked at Emmanuel, who nodded. They both understood what this meant. Lydia and Jay weren't just criminals. They were enemy spies operating on American soil. And their operation had been so successful that they'd been preparing to eliminate witnesses and extract their asset with a new identity and financial support. Call Colonel Stevens, Victor told Emmanuel. Tell him we have a code red domestic security situation. Full intelligence package required. Victor, Lydia said desperately. I can help you roll up the network. I can provide information about Meridian's other operations. You don't have to. You're right, Victor interrupted. You can help me roll up the network. But not because I'm offering you a deal. Because if you don't, I'm going to turn you over to the CIA's counterintelligence division, and they have facilities that make this basement look like a vacation resort. The next phase of Victor's plan was beginning to take shape. He wouldn't just rescue his son and punish his wife's betrayal. He would use their capture to destroy the entire network that had targeted his family. But first, he needed to ensure that Richard was completely safe and that no other assets were positioned to harm him. Emmanuel, Victor said, I need you to coordinate with Stevens on a full security sweep. I want to know about every Meridian operative on the East Coast, every military family they've targeted, and every piece of intelligence they've compromised. Already started, Emmanuel replied. This is bigger than we thought, boss. Initial reports suggest at least 15 military families have been infiltrated over the past 3 years. Victor absorbed this information with the cold calculation of a professional. 15 families meant potentially hundreds of compromised operations, thousands of endangered personnel, and unknown numbers of casualties that could be traced back to the intelligence these traitors had provided. Lydia, Victor said, turning back to his wife, you're going to help me destroy Meridian Solutions. You're going to provide every piece of information you have, cooperate fully with our investigation, and assist in capturing every operative in their network. And then, Victor's expression was completely without mercy. And then you're going to face justice for treason, espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, and whatever other charges the federal government decides to file against you. The woman who had once been his wife began to cry, but Victor felt nothing. The capacity for mercy had died in this basement along with his ability to trust in the fundamental goodness of family. Jay Massey would face the same fate, but his usefulness as a source of intelligence had already been exhausted. Victor looked at the man who had planned to burn his son alive and made a decision that would define the next phase of his campaign for justice. Some enemies deserved quick deaths. Others deserved to serve as examples. Chapter 6. The Hunt Begins. Within 12 hours of the basement confrontation, Victor's suburban home had been transformed into a command center for a multi-agency counterintelligence operation. Colonel Stevens had arrived with a full military intelligence team. The FBI had deployed counterespionage specialists, and the CIA's Domestic Operations Division had taken a keen interest in what Victor had uncovered. But despite the federal presence, Victor made it clear that this remained his operation. He had been the target, his family had been threatened, and his personal knowledge of the enemy made him the most valuable asset in the room. Meridian Solutions operates as a legitimate private military contractor. Special Agent Beverly Grady briefed the assembled team. But our investigation suggests they're actually a front for a multinational intelligence organization that sells American military secrets to the highest bidder. How many families have they infiltrated? Victor asked, studying the intelligence reports spread across his dining room table. Confirmed? 15 military families across 6 states, Colonel Stevens replied. Suspected? Potentially dozens more. They've been running this operation for at least 5 years, possibly longer. Victor felt the cold fury that had been building since the basement encounter crystallize into something more focused. This wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. This was about protecting every military family that Meridian had targeted or planned to target. "Where's Dale Stout?" Victor asked. "In federal custody as of 2 hours ago," Agent Grady replied. "Picked up at his Norfolk apartment. He's been very cooperative once we explained the terrorism charges he was facing." "And the extraction team that was supposed to help Lydia and Jay disappear?" "Still in position, as far as they know," Emmanuel said, reviewing intercepts from Lydia's phone. "They're expecting confirmation that the accident was successful and that their asset is ready for extraction." Victor studied the operational map that had been assembled from the intelligence they'd gathered. Meridian had positioned assets across the Mid-Atlantic region, with safe houses, transportation networks, and communication nodes that suggested a level of organization that went far beyond simple espionage. "They've been planning something bigger than just intelligence gathering," Victor concluded. "This infrastructure is designed for major operations." "We think you're right," Colonel Stevens said grimly. Dale Stout provided intelligence suggesting that Meridian has been tasked with identifying and eliminating key military personnel who pose threats to foreign interests. "Assassination," Agent Grady clarified. "They weren't just gathering intelligence, they were building target lists." The revelation added another layer to Victor's understanding of what he'd uncovered. Meridian hadn't just been using his wife to steal secrets. They'd been evaluating him as a potential target for elimination. His homecoming had likely saved not just his son's life, but his own. "What's the current status of their network?" Victor asked. 17 operatives identified and under surveillance," Emmanuel reported. 5 safe houses located, 3 extraction routes mapped, and one very interesting discovery. He pulled up a satellite photo on his tablet showing a compound in rural West Virginia, Meridian's regional headquarters. Intelligence suggests this is where they coordinate operations across the eastern seaboard. Victor studied the compound, his tactical mind automatically analyzing approach routes, defensive positions, and potential vulnerabilities. But more than that, he was considering the symbolic value of what lay before him. "How many American soldiers have died because of intelligence that came from this network?" he asked quietly. Colonel Stevens consulted his briefing materials. "Conservative estimate? At least 37 confirmed Kia incidents can be traced to compromised operational intelligence over the past 3 years. 37 American soldiers. 37 families destroyed. 37 coffins draped with flags that had been betrayed by people like his wife, who had sold their secrets for money and foreign promises." "I want to take that compound," Victor said. "Victor," Agent Grady began carefully, "this is now a federal investigation. We appreciate your cooperation, but my wife has been providing intelligence to enemy agents for 18 months, Victor interrupted. "My son was nearly murdered to facilitate the extraction of a hostile asset. My home was turned into a safe house for foreign intelligence operations. This is personal, and that's exactly why you can't be involved in the operational phase," Colonel Stevens said. "You're too close to this, Victor. Your judgment is compromised." Victor looked around the room at the federal agents and military personnel who had invaded his home. They were good people, professionals who would do their jobs with competence and dedication. But they hadn't been betrayed by the person they trusted most. They hadn't watched their child tied to a chair while his mother planned his murder. "There's another way to look at this," Victor said quietly. "Meridian believes their asset is still operational. They're expecting Lydia to confirm that the accident was successful and that she's ready for extraction." "What are you suggesting?" Agent Grady asked. "I'm suggesting we give them what they expect," Victor replied. "Let them try to extract her. Follow them back to their network. And then dismantle the entire organization from the inside out." Emmanuel caught on first. "You want to use Lydia as bait." "I want to use Lydia as justice," Victor corrected. "She chose to become an enemy asset. Now she can serve as an asset for the United States." One last time. The plan that emerged from the next 6 hours of coordination was elegant in its simplicity. Lydia would contact her Meridian handlers and confirm that the accident had been successful. She would request immediate extraction, citing concerns about police investigation. The extraction team would lead federal agents directly to Meridian's command structure. But Victor had additional plans that he didn't share with the federal team. Plans that involved ensuring that the people responsible for threatening his family would face consequences that extended far beyond the American justice system. "There's one more thing," Victor said as the briefing concluded. Jay Massey. What about him? Agent Grady asked. He's been cooperative, provided valuable intelligence, and helped us understand the scope of Meridian's operations, Victor said. I think he's earned the right to participate in the final phase of this operation. Colonel Stevens looked suspicious. Participate how? Victor's smile was completely without warmth. He's going to help us send a message to Meridian about what happens to people who target American families. The hunt for Meridian solutions was about to begin, and Victor Pugh was going to make sure that the enemy understood exactly what kind of man they had chosen to betray. Some lessons, after all, could only be taught through demonstration. Chapter 7. The Trap. The abandoned warehouse in Baltimore's industrial district had been chosen for its isolation and symbolic value. This was where Meridian Solutions had planned to stage Lydia's extraction after the successful murder of Victor and Richard Pugh. Instead, it would become the site of their downfall. Victor positioned himself on the warehouse's upper level, his sniper rifle trained on the entrance, while federal agents took concealed positions throughout the facility. The plan was surgical in its precision. Allow Meridian's extraction team to enter, capture them alive for interrogation, and follow the intelligence chain back to their command structure. But Victor had made additional preparations that went beyond the federal operation. Jay Massey sat zip-tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse floor, his shoulder wound bandaged, but still painful enough to keep him focused. A small explosive device was secured to his chest, not enough to kill him instantly, but enough to ensure he understood the gravity of his situation. Remember, Victor said through his earpiece to Jay, you volunteered for this. You wanted to send a message to your Meridian contacts about your commitment to the cause. This is insane, Jay whispered back. They'll kill me when they realize it's a trap. That's entirely possible, Victor agreed. But you should have considered that possibility before you decided to burn my son alive. Lydia sat 30 feet away, her hands bound behind her back, a small listening device hidden in her clothing. She had been coached extensively on what to say when the extraction team arrived, but Victor had ensured that her script contained subtle deviations that would identify her as a compromised asset to anyone with proper training. Meridian extraction team, 3 minutes out, Agent Grady reported from her concealed position. 2 vehicles, estimated 6 personnel. Victor adjusted his scope and settled into the shooting position that had served him well in hostile territories around the world. The difference this time was that he was defending his homeland instead of fighting in foreign lands. The warehouse doors opened precisely on schedule, and 3 armed men entered with the confident movements of professionals. They wore tactical gear, but no identifying markings, and their weapons were civilian models that wouldn't immediately identify them as military contractors. Lydia Chun, the team leader called out, using the alias that Meridian had provided for her new identity. Time to go. Thank God you're here, Lydia replied, following her script. The police have been asking questions about the fire. I think they're suspicious. The team leader approached her position while his 2 companions secured the perimeter. Victor tracked their movements through his scope, noting their training and tactical awareness. These weren't common criminals. They were skilled operatives who had been trained by professionals. Where's the package? The team leader asked, referring to the intelligence documents that Lydia was supposed to have stolen from Victor's files. Jay has them, Lydia replied, nodding toward the chair where Jay sat 20 feet away. The team leader approached Jay's position, his weapon at the ready. That was when he noticed the explosive device secured to Jay's chest and the terror in the man's eyes. This is a trap, Jay said loudly, deviating from the script Victor had provided. Federal agents, snipers, the whole place is surrounded. She's been compromised. Victor smiled grimly. Jay's betrayal of the federal operation had been anticipated and planned for. In fact, it was exactly what Victor needed to justify the next phase of his personal war against Meridian. The extraction team immediately shifted into defensive positions, but they were already too late. Federal agents emerged from concealment with tactical lights and commands to surrender, while Victor maintained overwatch from his elevated position. But instead of a clean capture operation, the warehouse erupted into chaos as the Meridian operatives chose to fight their way out rather than surrender. Gunfire echoed off the concrete walls as professional soldiers engaged each other in close-quarters combat. From his sniper position, Victor had clear shots at all 3 extraction team members. He could have ended the firefight in seconds with precision shots that would have disabled without killing. Instead, he waited, allowing the situation to develop in a way that served his larger purposes. The team leader took cover behind a concrete pillar and activated a communication device. "Package is compromised," he reported, requesting immediate support and extraction. That communication was exactly what Victor had been waiting for. The federal team was tracking the signal, following it back through Meridian's communication network to identify their command structure. But Victor had additional plans for the intelligence that was being gathered. Federal agents. Agent Grady shouted over the gunfire. "Surrender now, and you will not be harmed." The response was a sustained burst of automatic weapons fire that forced the federal team to take deeper cover. These operatives had clearly been instructed to avoid capture at all costs, which suggested they possessed intelligence that Meridian couldn't afford to lose. That was when Victor decided to take direct action. His first shot took the team leader in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind his concrete barrier. The second shot disabled the operative's weapon, ensuring he couldn't continue fighting. The third shot hit a tactical light, plunging half the warehouse into darkness. In the confusion that followed, Victor moved from his sniper position to the warehouse floor with the fluid precision of a man who had spent years moving through hostile territory. But instead of supporting the federal team's capture operation, he had a different objective. He reached Jay's position just as the explosive device he'd planted earlier activated. Not the large explosion he'd threatened, but a small incendiary charge that ignited the man's clothing and sent him screaming across the warehouse floor. "Message delivered," Victor said quietly, watching Jay stumble toward the Meridian operatives with his clothes on fire. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The remaining Meridian operatives, seeing their supposed ally burning and screaming, broke cover to try to help him. That exposed them to federal agents, who quickly overwhelmed and captured them. But the real message wasn't for the extraction team. It was for Meridian's leadership, who would soon learn that their network had been infiltrated by someone willing to burn their own assets alive to send a point. "All targets secured," Agent Grady reported 20 minutes later. "3 Meridian operatives in custody, plus our 2 primary assets." Victor gathered his equipment and prepared to leave the warehouse, but his work was far from over. The federal team would handle the legal prosecution of the captured operatives. But Victor had his own plans for ensuring that Meridian Solutions understood the consequences of targeting American families. Plans that would take him far beyond the reach of American law enforcement and into the shadows where wars were fought without rules or mercy. The trap had been successful, but the hunt was just beginning. Chapter 8: Justice Served. The federal investigation that followed the warehouse operation unraveled Meridian Solutions' network across 3 continents. Within 72 hours, coordinated raids had captured 17 operatives, seized 4 safe houses, and recovered intelligence linking the organization to hostile foreign governments in China, Russia, and Iran. But while the FBI celebrated their success in dismantling a major espionage network, Victor Pugh was planning a very different kind of justice. The intelligence gathered from captured Meridian operatives revealed the location of their primary training facility, a compound in rural Romania where new recruits were taught to infiltrate military families and steal American secrets. More importantly, it housed the leadership team that had authorized the targeting of Victor's family. "You're not going," Colonel Stevens said when Victor requested leave to handle personal business overseas. "This is over, Victor. The network is broken, your family is safe, and justice is being served through proper channels." "My wife sold intelligence that got 37 American soldiers killed," Victor replied. "My son was nearly murdered to cover up an espionage operation. Justice through proper channels means Lydia spends 20 years in a comfortable federal prison before being eligible for parole. That's how our legal system works. Our legal system doesn't account for treason during wartime," Victor said quietly. "And it doesn't account for people who target children." Victor's resignation from the military became effective at midnight. By dawn, he was aboard a civilian aircraft bound for Eastern Europe, traveling under one of several identities he'd maintained during his years of Black Ops work. Emmanuel Kane had chosen to join him, along with 2 other members of their former unit who had been personally affected by Meridian's intelligence operations. They traveled separately and light, carrying only the specialized equipment that couldn't be acquired locally. The Romanian compound sat in a valley surrounded by dense forest, isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry, but accessible enough for regular supply deliveries. Surveillance from the surrounding hills revealed 12 permanent personnel, plus an unknown number of trainees and temporary visitors. But Victor wasn't interested in a clean military operation. He wanted to send a message that would reach every intelligence organization that might consider targeting American families in the future. 2 guards at the main entrance, Emmanuel reported through the radio. For more patrolling the perimeter. Looks like they're expecting trouble. Good, Victor replied from his position overlooking the compound. They should be. The assault began at 3 a.m. with a diversionary explosion at the compound's vehicle depot. As guards rushed to investigate, Victor's team infiltrated through the now undefended eastern perimeter. But instead of neutralizing targets quickly and efficiently, Victor had planned something more deliberate. The first guard died silently, his throat cut with a knife that had been manufactured in China, a symbolic gesture that Victor wanted the survivors to understand. The second guard was left alive but unconscious, zip-tied with a note pinned to his chest. Your colleagues who targeted American families are waiting for you in hell. By the time the compound's leadership realized they were under attack, Victor's team had already secured the main building and cut all communication lines. The remaining guards found themselves trapped in a facility that had become their prison. Pavel Kozlov, Victor said, reading from a tablet as he entered the compound's command center. Age 46, former Russian Spetsnaz, current director of operations for Meridian Solutions. Personally responsible for authorizing intelligence operations against American military families. The man tied to the chair looked up at Victor with the defiant expression of a professional who had been captured but not defeated. You are making a mistake, American. Killing me will not stop what has already begun. You're right, Victor agreed. Killing you won't stop anything. But what happens to you in the next few hours will stop other people from making your mistakes. Over the next 3 hours, Victor systematically extracted information about Meridian's remaining operations, financial networks, and personnel. But more than intelligence gathering, this was about sending a message that would travel through the international intelligence community. When Victor's team finally left the Romanian compound, they left behind a scene that would be discovered by local authorities 3 days later. 12 Meridian operatives, all alive but permanently marked with scars that told the story of what happened to people who targeted American children. Pavel Kozlov survived, but with injuries that would serve as a permanent reminder of the consequences of betraying American families. More importantly, he carried a message that Victor wanted delivered to every intelligence organization in the world. The message was simple. American families are protected by American soldiers. Test that protection at your own peril. But Victor's work wasn't finished. Upon returning to the United States, he had one final piece of business to complete. The federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, was bustling with normal activity when Victor arrived for Lydia's sentencing hearing. She had pleaded guilty to espionage, conspiracy, and attempted murder in exchange for a 25-year sentence with possibility of parole in 15 years. Victor sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as the woman who had been his wife for 12 years was led away in shackles. She turned to look at him one last time, perhaps hoping to see some remnant of the man who had once loved her. Instead, she saw only cold satisfaction in the eyes of someone who had ensured that justice was served according to his own standards rather than the court's. As Victor left the courthouse, he received a text message from an unlisted number. Your point has been received and understood. Meridian Solutions has been dissolved. No further operations will target American families. The message wasn't signed, but Victor knew it had come from someone with the authority to make that promise binding. His phone rang as he reached his car. Richard's voice was bright and excited. Dad, Grandma says you're coming to pick me up today. Are we really going to that baseball game? We are, Victor confirmed, smiling for the first time in weeks. Just you and me, buddy. We've got a lot of catching up to do. As Victor drove toward his son's temporary home with his mother-in-law, he reflected on the past week's events. The federal government had dismantled a major espionage network. International intelligence organizations had received a clear message about the consequences of targeting American families. And justice had been served according to both legal and personal standards. But most importantly, Richard was safe. The boy would grow up knowing that his father had protected him when protection was needed most. and that some betrayals could never be forgiven or forgotten. Victor Pugh had learned to live with the fact that the people closest to him could become his most dangerous enemies. But he had also learned that when family was threatened, there were no limits to what a father would do to ensure justice was served. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 6 months after the dissolution of Meridian Solutions, Victor Pugh stood in the kitchen of his new home in Montana, watching his son Richard practice baseball in the backyard. The house was smaller than their Virginia mansion, but it sat on 50 acres of pristine wilderness where a boy could grow up learning to hunt, fish, and understand the value of self-reliance. The official records showed that Victor had resigned from the military to pursue private security consulting. The unofficial records, known only to a select few in the intelligence community, showed that he had become something more valuable, a man who served as a deterrent to anyone considering operations against American military families. "Dad," Richard called from the yard. "Want to pitch to me?" "Be right there," Victor replied, setting down the intelligence report he'd been reviewing. The document detailed the aftermath of Meridian's destruction and confirmed that no similar organizations had attempted to fill the void they'd left behind. The boy had recovered from his ordeal with the resilience that Victor had hoped to see. Richard had asked difficult questions about his mother's actions, and Victor had answered them with age-appropriate honesty. The boy understood that some people made very bad choices, and that sometimes those people had to face consequences that separated them from their families forever. But Richard had also learned that his father would protect him from any danger, no matter the cost or consequences. That knowledge had given the boy a sense of security that allowed him to move forward without the fear that might have crippled a less resilient child. Victor's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Emmanuel, who had established his own security consulting firm after leaving the military. New contract opportunity. International client requests consultation on family protection protocols. Interested? Victor smiled as he typed his response. Only if the family has been targeted by hostile intelligence organizations. We seem to specialize in that particular problem. The truth was that Victor's reputation in the intelligence community had made him a sought-after consultant for military families who had reason to believe they might be targeted by foreign operatives. His methods were unorthodox and occasionally illegal, but his success rate was perfect. 3 families had requested his services in the past 6 months. In each case, Victor had identified and neutralized threats before they could materialize into actual danger. Word was spreading through certain circles that American military families had acquired a protector who operated according to his own rules and showed no mercy to those who threatened children. Strike 3. Richard shouted as he swung and missed at an imaginary pitch. "I'm getting better, Dad. Next season, I'm going to make the All-Star team." "I believe you will," Victor replied, walking outside to join his son. "But remember what we talked about. Success comes from discipline, preparation, and never giving up," Richard finished. "I know, Dad. You've only told me that 1,000 times." Victor ruffled his son's hair, marveling at how normal this moment felt despite everything they'd been through. The boy was growing up strong and confident, with the knowledge that his father would always be there to protect him. That evening, after Richard had gone to bed, Victor received a visitor. Dale Stout had been released from federal prison after serving as a key witness in the prosecution of Meridian operatives. His cooperation had been valuable enough to earn him a reduced sentence, but his freedom came with conditions. "I wanted to thank you," Dale said, standing awkwardly on Victor's front porch, "for not killing me when you had the chance." "You're Jay's brother," Victor replied. "But you're not Jay. You made mistakes, but you didn't plan to murder children." Dale nodded, understanding the distinction. "I heard about what happened to the Meridian leadership in Romania. The intelligence community is calling it a message. The intelligence community should understand that some messages need to be delivered in person," Victor said. "There's something else," Dale continued. "Rumors about other organizations that might be interested in testing American resolve. Chinese intelligence, specifically. They're talking about operations targeting military families on the West Coast." Victor felt the familiar cold calculation settling over him. "Names? Locations? Operational details. I can get them," Dale said. "I still have contacts in that world. People who trust me because they think I'm still angry about my brother's death." "Are you?" Dale was quiet for a long moment. Jay chose his path. He chose to target an innocent child. What happened to him was justice, not murder. Victor studied the man standing on his porch, evaluating his sincerity and potential usefulness. Dale Stout had been a weapons trafficker and intelligence broker, but he had never crossed the line into harming children. That distinction mattered in Victor's moral calculus. If you provide intelligence about threats to American families, Victor said finally, you'll be contributing to something worthwhile. But understand that I don't forgive, and I don't forget. Cross me once, and there won't be a second chance. Understood, Dale replied. I want to make things right. For Jay, for the soldiers who died because of the intelligence we sold, for all of it. After Dale left, Victor stood on his porch looking out at the Montana wilderness and thinking about the future. Richard was safe, but there were other military families who might face the same threats that had nearly destroyed his own. As long as hostile intelligence organizations existed, there would be a need for someone willing to operate outside legal boundaries to protect American children. His phone buzzed with another message from Emmanuel. Chinese intelligence activity reported on West Coast. 3 military families potentially targeted. Client requests immediate consultation. Victor looked through the window at Richard, sleeping peacefully in his new bedroom, protected by security systems that would alert Victor to any threat within a 5-mile radius. The boy would never again face the terror of being tied to a chair while adults planned his murder. But other children might face similar threats unless someone was willing to send clear messages about the consequences of targeting American families. Victor typed his response to Emmanuel, pack for California. Time to remind our Chinese friends about the rules of engagement. As he locked the house and checked the security systems one final time, Victor reflected on how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a husband and father who believed in the fundamental goodness of family. That man had died in a soundproofed basement when he discovered that the people he trusted most had betrayed everything he fought to protect. What had emerged from that betrayal was something more dangerous, but also more necessary. A guardian who would ensure that no other military child would face the terror that Richard had endured. Someone who understood that some battles could only be won by men willing to operate outside the law to protect the innocent. Victor Pugh had learned to live without forgiveness, without mercy, and without the illusion that enemies could be redeemed rather than destroyed. But he had also learned that protecting family, whether biological or adopted, was worth any sacrifice and any consequence. The war against those who targeted American families would continue, and Victor would be ready to fight it according to his own rules, for as long as children needed protection from the monsters that hid behind foreign flags and shadowy organizations. Some men were born to be soldiers. Others were made by betrayal into something more dangerous, protectors who would never stop hunting the people who threatened the innocent. In the mountains of Montana, surrounded by wilderness and silence, Victor Pugh had found peace. But he had also found his true calling, ensuring that peace was protected by strength, and that justice was served by those willing to pay its price. The story of his marriage was over. The story of his war was just beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.